The sky above the barren wasteland glowed an eerie shade of orange, streaked with dark clouds that churned like a restless beast. On the cracked, dusty ground below, a lone figure stood her ground, clutching a weapon that hummed faintly in defiance of the chaos around her. Her name was Lyra, and she was exhausted. Lyra's tall frame leaned slightly forward as if bracing against an invisible wind. Her metallic armor bore deep scratches from countless battles, each mark telling a story of survival. Her large, almond-shaped eyes, wide and glowing softly with a pale blue light, scanned the horizon where shadows moved ominously. She wasn't alone out here, but she might as well have been. Behind her lay the remnants of what had once been a thriving colony for her kind, a small outpost built by refugees fleeing their dying homeworld. Now it was nothing more than smoldering ruins, reduced to rubble by relentless waves of attackers. And now those same enemies were closing in on her. They came slowly at first, emerging from the haze like ghosts materializing into reality. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They were grotesque creatures, hunched and spindly, with too many limbs and jagged teeth bared in feral grins. Their bodies shimmered unnaturally, almost liquid-like, making them seem less solid and more like nightmares given form. Lyra tightened her grip on her plasma rifle, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. It was one of the few weapons left intact after the last assault, and she knew it wouldn't hold up forever. Already, the energy core inside flickered weakly, its charge dangerously low. But giving up wasn't an option, not yet. Not while there was still breath in her lungs. She exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but she forced herself to focus. These creatures weren't just mindless beasts, they were hunters, intelligent enough to strategize and adapt. If she faltered even for a moment, they would overwhelm her. "Come on!" she muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of thunder. "Just try me." As if responding to her challenge, the nearest creature lunged forward with startling speed, its clawed appendages slicing through the air. Lyra reacted instantly, firing a burst of searing blue energy that struck the creature square in the chest. It let out a high-pitched screech before collapsing into a puddle of black goo. But there was no time to celebrate. More of them surged forward, their movements erratic but purposeful. Lyra fired again and again, each shot finding its mark but doing little to thin their numbers. Sweat dripped down her forehead, mingling with streaks of dirt and ash. Her arms trembled from the strain, but she refused to stop. Then, something unexpected happened. A sharp crack echoed across the battlefield, followed by another. One of the creatures stumbled mid-leap, a gaping hole suddenly appearing in its torso. Another fell moments later, this time with a precise shot to the head. Confused, Lyra glanced around, searching for the source of the attack. That's when she saw him. Standing atop a rocky ridge some distance away was a human, a man dressed in rugged combat gear, his face partially obscured by a helmet. In his hands was a sleek sniper rifle, and he didn't hesitate to take another shot, dropping yet another creature with deadly accuracy. For a brief moment, Lyra froze. Humans were rare in these parts of the galaxy, especially ones bold enough to venture into hostile territory armed only with primitive firearms. Yet here he was, fighting alongside her without hesitation. "Who are you?" she whispered, though the words were lost in the cacophony of battle. The man didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted his stance, taking aim once more. This time, however, he shouted something in a language Lyra couldn't understand. Still, the meaning was clear: we fight together. And so, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lyra didn't feel entirely alone. The human's presence changed everything, or at least, it gave Lyra a sliver of hope she hadn't dared to feel in days. His shots were precise and unrelenting, each one finding its mark with deadly efficiency. The creatures hesitated briefly, their grotesque forms twitching as if confused by this new threat. For a moment, the tide seemed to shift ever so slightly in their favor. But Lyra knew better than to let her guard down. These creatures were relentless, driven by instincts far older than either of them could comprehend. They wouldn't retreat, not even in the face of superior firepower. If anything, the humans' intervention only made them angrier, more determined to tear apart whatever stood in their way. "Stay focused," Lyra muttered to herself, though part of her wanted to call out to the man. Who was he? Why had he chosen to fight alongside her when he could have easily fled? Humans weren't known for their selflessness, especially not in situations like this. Still, there was no time to dwell on such questions now. She adjusted her stance, planting her feet firmly on the cracked earth beneath her. Her plasma rifle whined as she fired again, cutting down 2 more of the creatures before they could reach her position. The weapon's energy core flickered ominously, but she ignored it. She couldn't afford to think about running out of ammunition, not yet. Meanwhile, the human continued his assault from the ridge, moving methodically between targets. He didn't waste a single shot, conserving his resources while maximizing damage. Lyra found herself impressed despite herself. Whoever he was, he clearly knew how to handle himself in a fight. Then came the inevitable surge. As if responding to some unseen signal, the creatures abandoned all pretense of caution and charged en masse. Their shrieks filled the air, a cacophony of rage and hunger that sent shivers down Lyra's spine. She gritted her teeth, firing rapidly as they closed the distance. One by one they fell, but for every creature she killed, 3 more took its place. "We can't hold them off forever!" she shouted, hoping the human would hear her over the din. Whether or not he did, he acted accordingly. With a final shot, he leapt off the ridge, landing gracefully in a crouch beside her. Up close, Lyra got her first good look at him. His armor was battered but functional, patched together with scraps of metal and fabric. A scar ran along his jawline, partially hidden by stubble, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, met hers without hesitation. "You're welcome," he said dryly, his voice rough but steady. Lyra blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of his words. "You speak my language?" "Learned it from traders," he replied with a shrug, reloading his rifle with practiced ease. "Figured it might come in handy someday." Before Lyra could respond, another wave of creatures lunged toward them. The human raised his weapon, firing a burst of bullets that tore through their ranks. Lyra followed suit, her plasma rifle humming as it discharged bolt after bolt of searing energy. Together, they formed a makeshift line of defense, their backs pressed against each other as they fought off the onslaught. "They just keep coming," the human muttered, his tone grim but resolute. "They always do," Lyra agreed, her voice tight with strain. "This is their world now. We're the intruders." He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable behind the visor of his helmet. "Then why are you still here?" It was a fair question, one Lyra had asked herself countless times since arriving on this desolate planet. But the answer was simple, painful as it was to admit. "Because I don't have anywhere else to go." The human didn't reply, but something in his posture softened, as if her words had struck a chord within him. Perhaps he understood what it meant to be trapped, to fight not just for survival but for something greater, a sense of purpose, however fleeting it might be. For several tense minutes they fought side by side, their movements synchronized despite never having met before. Lyra marveled at how seamlessly they worked together, as if fate itself had brought them to this moment. Each shot, each step, felt like a dance choreographed by desperation and instinct. But even the best dancers eventually tire, and Lyra could feel her strength waning. Her arms burned from holding the rifle steady, and her legs trembled beneath her weight. The energy core in her weapon flashed red, signaling that it was nearly depleted. "We need to fall back," she said, glancing over her shoulder at the ruins of the colony. It wasn't much of a refuge, but it was better than nothing. The human nodded, his expression grim. "Lead the way." Without waiting for further discussion, Lyra turned and sprinted toward the wreckage, the human close behind her. The creatures gave chase, their guttural cries echoing across the barren landscape. Every step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion threatening to pull Lyra into darkness. Just as they reached the edge of the ruins, the human grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a collapsed wall. "Hold up," he said, raising his rifle once more. Lyra obeyed, sinking to her knees as she struggled to catch her breath. Through the haze of fatigue, she watched as the human fired round after round, his aim unwavering even as sweat poured down his face. And then, suddenly, the creatures stopped. They froze mid-charge, their heads tilting unnaturally as if listening to some silent command. For a moment, the battlefield fell eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the wind sweeping across the wasteland. "What are they doing?" Lyra whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. The human lowered his rifle slightly, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't know, but it can't be good." As if on cue, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Small rocks tumbled loose from the ruined walls, clattering to the ground as the vibrations grew stronger. Lyra exchanged a worried glance with the human, both of them realizing the same thing at once. Whatever was coming next, it was going to be worse. Far worse. The trembling grew into a violent quake, shaking the very foundation of the ruined colony. Dust rained down from crumbling walls as fissures began to spiderweb across the cracked earth. Lyra and the human crouched low, bracing themselves against the chaos unfolding around them. "What's happening?" the human shouted over the roar of collapsing debris. His voice was tense, laced with urgency. "I don't know," Lyra snapped back, her glowing blue eyes darting frantically between the quaking ground and the creatures frozen in eerie silence. "But it's not natural." The alien beasts hadn't moved since the tremors began. Their grotesque forms swayed slightly, almost as though they were listening, or waiting, for something. Whatever controlled them had clearly orchestrated this new development, and that thought alone sent a chill running down Lyra's spine. Suddenly, the ground split open with a deafening crack. A massive chasm yawned wide just beyond the edge of the ruins, its jagged edges glowing faintly with an unnatural light. From within the abyss came a sound unlike anything either of them had ever heard, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through their bones. It wasn't mechanical or organic, it was something else entirely, ancient and otherworldly. And then it emerged. At first, all they could see was movement, something large and sinuous rising from the depths of the chasm. Its form shifted constantly, defying logic as if it existed in multiple states at once. Glimmers of dark metal and pulsating veins of energy rippled across its surface, while tendrils of shadow stretched outward like probing fingers. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. That's what's been commanding them," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible over the growing din. The human turned to her sharply, his expression grim. "You mean there's a boss fight now?" She shot him a confused look, unfamiliar with the term, but there was no time for explanations. The towering entity fully emerged from the chasm, its presence dwarfing everything around it. The smaller creatures immediately bowed low, their spindly limbs scraping against the ground in submission. "Well," the human muttered, gripping his rifle tightly, "this just got complicated." "Complicated doesn't begin to cover it," Lyra replied, forcing herself to stand despite her exhaustion. Her plasma rifle was nearly dead, its core flickering erratically, but she raised it anyway. There was no point in surrendering, not when facing something so utterly alien and malevolent. The entity didn't attack right away. Instead, it loomed above them, its shifting form exuding an aura of menace that made it hard to breathe. Then, without warning, one of its shadowy tendrils lashed out, striking the ground mere meters away from where they stood. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the air, knocking both Lyra and the human off their feet. "Okay, Plan B!" the human yelled, scrambling back up. He fired a few rounds at the creature, but the bullets passed harmlessly through its semi-solid form, dissipating into nothingness. "It's not physical!" Lyra shouted, realizing the same truth. "We can't hurt it like this." "Great," he muttered, dodging another tendril strike. "Any bright ideas then?" Lyra hesitated, her mind racing. The answer came to her in fragments, piecing together memories of her people's old tech, the kind designed specifically for dealing with threats beyond conventional understanding. But accessing that technology would require reaching the heart of the ruined colony, where the last remnants of her equipment lay buried under rubble. "There's a weapon," she said finally, meeting the human's gaze. "An experimental pulse emitter capable of disrupting non-corporeal entities." If we can reach it, we might have a chance. The human frowned, glancing back at the monstrous entity looming over them. Might? It's our only shot, Lyra insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. He nodded curtly, reloading his rifle. Lead the way, then. I'll cover you. With no time to waste, Lyra bolted toward the center of the ruins, weaving between fallen debris and narrowly avoiding the entity's relentless attacks. The humans stayed close behind her, firing bursts of gunfire whenever one of the smaller creatures tried to intercept them. Each step felt heavier than the last, her body screaming in protest, but she pushed on, driven by sheer determination. When they reached the central structure, a half-collapsed dome partially buried beneath layers of wreckage, Lyra dropped to her knees, clawing at the rubble with desperate hands. The human joined her, tossing aside chunks of concrete and twisted metal until they uncovered what they were looking for, a sleek, cylindrical device about the size of a small crate. This is it, Lyra said, activating the emitter with trembling fingers. The device hummed to life, emitting a soft, pulsating glow that seemed to resonate with the surrounding energy. The entity noticed immediately. With a deafening screech, it redirected its attention toward them, its tendrils lashing out with renewed ferocity. One of them struck the dome above, causing the entire structure to groan ominously. We need to stabilize it, the human shouted, grabbing hold of a support beam to keep it from collapsing. Just give me a minute, Lyra replied, frantically adjusting the settings on the emitter. She could feel the vibrations syncing with the entity's chaotic frequency, but it wasn't enough yet. They needed more power. As if reading her thoughts, the human pulled a small, portable battery pack from his belt and tossed it to her. Will this help? Lyra caught it midair, her eyes widening in surprise. Where did you get this? Stole it from some scavengers last week, he admitted with a shrug. Thought it might come in handy. For the first time since meeting him, Lyra allowed herself a brief smile. You're full of surprises. She connected the battery pack to the emitter, boosting its output significantly. The device's glow intensified, bathing the area in a brilliant white light. The entity recoiled, its form flickering erratically as the pulses disrupted its cohesion. It's working! The human exclaimed, ducking as another tendril whipped past his head. Not for long, Lyra warned, gritting her teeth as she struggled to maintain the connection. If we don't finish it soon, it'll adapt. The human glanced at her, then at the emitter, before nodding resolutely. Tell me what to do. Without hesitation, Lyra handed him a secondary control panel. Keep the frequency steady. If it drops even slightly, the effect will break. And you? I'm going to overload the core, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. It'll destroy the entity, but it'll take us with it if we don't move fast. The human stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he took the panel and began stabilizing the frequency, trusting her completely. Lyra activated the overload sequence, her fingers flying over the controls as the countdown timer flashed red. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Go! She shouted, shoving the human toward the exit. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before sprinting after her, the two of them racing against time as the emitter's power surged uncontrollably. Behind them, the entity let out a final, ear-splitting scream, its form dissolving into a storm of chaotic energy. 5. 4. 3. They dove through the collapsing doorway just as the world erupted in blinding light. The explosion was deafening, a shockwave of raw energy that tore through the ruins like a tidal wave. Lyra and the human were thrown clear, their bodies tumbling across the cracked earth as debris rained down around them. For a moment, all Lyra could see was white, a blinding flash of light that seared her vision and left her disoriented. Her ears rang painfully, drowning out every other sound except for the dull thud of her own heartbeat. When the chaos finally subsided, she lay still for several seconds, trying to catch her breath. Every inch of her body ached, and her armor was scorched in places where fragments of rubble had struck her. Slowly, she pushed herself up onto her elbows, blinking away the spots clouding her sight. The first thing she noticed was silence. Not the eerie quiet that had preceded the entity's arrival, but a profound absence of noise, no shrieking creatures, no ominous hums, nothing but the faint whistle of wind sweeping across the barren landscape. She turned her head, searching for the human. He was sprawled a few meters away, his rifle lying discarded beside him. His helmet had come loose during the blast, revealing a face streaked with dirt and sweat. His eyes were closed, but his chest rose and fell steadily, indicating he was alive. Relief washed over Lyra, though it was short-lived. She forced herself to stand, wincing at the pain shooting through her legs. The area surrounding them was unrecognizable now. A crater stretched where the ruins once stood, its edges glowing faintly from residual energy. The chasm that had birthed the entity was gone, sealed shut by the force of the explosion. Lyra limped over to the human, kneeling beside him. "Hey," she said, her voice hoarse. "Wake up." He stirred groggily, his eyelids fluttering open. For a moment he simply stared up at her, his expression blank. Then recognition dawned, and he groaned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Did we win?" "We did," Lyra confirmed, offering him a hand. "For now, at least." He accepted it, allowing her to pull him to his feet. He swayed slightly, clearly dazed, but managed to steady himself after a moment. "That thing's really gone. As far as I can tell," she replied, glancing around cautiously. "Its presence is absent. Whatever it was, it's not here anymore." The human nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the smoking crater. "Good. I don't think I could handle another boss fight anytime soon." Despite everything, Lyra couldn't help but chuckle softly. "You're strange, you know that?" "Yeah, well, so are you," he shot back with a smirk. "Alien girl fighting off an army of monsters with a dying plasma rifle? Pretty sure that makes us even." Lyra tilted her head, studying him curiously. "Why did you stay? You didn't have to fight. You could have left me here." The human shrugged, his smirk fading into something more thoughtful. "I guess I saw someone who needed help. And honestly, I've been on my own long enough to know how much it sucks. Figured 2 heads might be better than 1. His words struck a chord deep within her. In truth, she hadn't expected anyone to step in, not out here, not when survival often meant looking out for yourself above all else. Yet this human had done exactly that, without hesitation or expectation of reward. It was unexpected. "Well," she said finally, her tone softening. "Thank you. I wouldn't have made it without you." "Don't mention it," he replied, brushing some dust off his shoulder. "Besides, looks like we're stuck together now anyway. Unless you've got a spaceship hidden somewhere?" Lyra shook her head. "No ship. Just scraps of what used to be my people's colony. We're stranded here, same as you." The human sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. Guess we'll need to figure out our next move, huh?" Before Lyra could respond, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Both of them froze, their eyes darting toward the horizon. At first, it seemed like nothing more than the aftershock of the explosion, but then, shapes began to emerge from the haze. More creatures. They weren't the same ones they'd fought before. These were smaller, faster, their forms sleeker and less grotesque. They moved in packs, their movements coordinated as if guided by intelligence. "They must have been drawn by the explosion," Lyra muttered, gripping the hilt of a small blade strapped to her side. Her plasma rifle was useless now, its core completely drained. The human raised his rifle, checking the magazine. "Got maybe 10 rounds left. Better make 'em count." Lyra nodded grimly, stepping forward to meet the approaching threat. These new creatures might be different, but the principle remained the same: survive. As the first pack lunged toward them, the human fired, taking down 2 with precise shots. Lyra followed suit, using her blade to parry and strike with deadly efficiency. Together, they formed a tight defensive line, their movements fluid despite their exhaustion. But the creatures kept coming. "This isn't going to work," Lyra shouted, dodging a clawed swipe. "I know!" the human yelled back, reloading his rifle. "We need higher ground." Without waiting for further discussion, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a nearby ridge. It wasn't much, but it offered a vantage point and a chance to regroup. They scrambled up the rocky slope, pausing only to fire back at the advancing horde. Once atop the ridge, Lyra scanned the area, her mind racing. There had to be a way out of this. There! She exclaimed suddenly, pointing toward a narrow canyon in the distance. If we can reach that, we might be able to lose them. The human squinted, assessing the route. It's risky, but it's better than standing here and getting overwhelmed. Agreed, Lyra said, already moving. Follow me. They sprinted across the open terrain, weaving between rocks and craters as the creatures gave chase. The canyon loomed closer with each step, its jagged walls promising temporary refuge. But just as they reached the entrance, a shadow passed overhead. Both of them skidded to a halt, looking up in alarm. Hovering above them was a massive craft, an unfamiliar design, sleek and angular, with glowing blue thrusters keeping it aloft. A spotlight descended, illuminating them in its harsh glare. What now? The human muttered, raising his rifle instinctively. Lyra held up a hand, her heart pounding. Wait! That's not one of theirs. A loudspeaker crackled to life, and a voice boomed down at them. It spoke in a language neither of them understood, but the tone was clear: surrender, or be destroyed. Well, the human said dryly, lowering his weapon slightly. Looks like we've got company. Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Options? He shrugged, meeting her gaze. We play along, for now. See where this takes us. With no other choice, they raised their hands in surrender, stepping into the light. Above them, the craft descended, its hatch opening to reveal figures clad in advanced armor. As they approached, Lyra felt a mixture of relief and unease. Whoever these newcomers were, they were powerful and unpredictable. One thing was certain: their journey was far from over. The armored figures descended from the hovering craft with practiced precision, their movements fluid and deliberate. Their suits were sleek, adorned with insignias that neither Lyra nor the human recognized. Each step they took radiated authority, as if they were soldiers accustomed to enforcing order without question. Lyra raised her hands higher, palms open in a universal gesture of surrender. The human mirrored her stance, though his jaw was clenched tightly, his eyes darting between the newcomers and the horde of creatures still closing in behind them. Think they're friendly? He muttered under his breath, his tone laced with skepticism. I don't think friendly is the right word, Lyra replied softly, keeping her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. But they're better than the alternative. One of the armored figures stepped forward, raising a hand to signal the others to hold their positions. They stopped just a few meters away, their helmets tilting slightly as if studying the pair before them. A low hum emanated from their armor, likely some form of scanning technology. You are not of this world, the figure said finally, its voice distorted but clear through a translator embedded in its helmet. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, delivered with an air of certainty. No, we're not, Lyra answered cautiously. We're survivors. We mean no harm. The figure turned its head toward the advancing creatures, which had slowed but not stopped their approach. Its posture stiffened slightly, as if assessing the threat level. Then, without warning, it raised an arm and fired a pulse of energy into the nearest pack of creatures. The blast sent them sprawling, their bodies convulsing before collapsing into lifeless heaps. The rest of the creatures hesitated, their instincts clearly torn between aggression and self-preservation. After a tense moment, they began retreating into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. The armored figure lowered its weapon, turning back to face Lyra and the human. Explain yourselves, it demanded, its tone sharp and commanding. Lyra exchanged a glance with the human, silently asking whether she should speak first. He gave a subtle nod, deferring to her judgment. Taking a deep breath, she began recounting their ordeal, the destruction of her colony, the relentless attacks by the creatures, the emergence of the monstrous entity, and finally, their desperate attempt to destroy it using the experimental pulse emitter. When she finished, the figure stood in silence for several seconds, its helmeted head tilted slightly as if processing the information. Then, it gestured to the others, who moved forward and secured both Lyra and the human with magnetic restraints around their wrists. "What's going on?" the human asked sharply, struggling against the bindings. "You said you wanted answers, now you're treating us like prisoners?" "You will come with us," the figure replied, ignoring his protests. "Your actions have drawn attention. We must determine your intent, and ensure you pose no further risk." Before either of them could argue, the group ushered them aboard the hovering craft. The interior was stark and utilitarian, lined with glowing panels and seating designed for beings much larger than humans or Lyra's kind. Two of the armored figures flanked them, their weapons trained steadily on the captives while the rest took their stations at various consoles. As the craft lifted off, Lyra pressed herself against the wall, trying to process everything that had happened. She glanced at the human, who sat opposite her with a scowl etched across his face. "This day keeps getting better," he muttered sarcastically, shaking his head. "At least we're alive," Lyra pointed out, though even she couldn't muster much enthusiasm. "For now." The human let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, because being locked up by mysterious space cops is exactly what I signed up for." Their banter was cut short as the craft accelerated, leaving the barren wasteland far below. Through the windows, Lyra caught glimpses of unfamiliar terrain, rolling hills dotted with strange crystalline structures, vast lakes shimmering with bioluminescent hues, and towering spires that seemed to pierce the sky itself. "Where are they taking us?" the human whispered, leaning closer to Lyra. She shook her head. "I don't know. But wherever it is, it's not random. These people, they're organized. Purposeful." He frowned, glancing at their guards. "You think they're part of some kind of intergalactic police force? Or maybe mercenaries?" "It's possible," Lyra admitted. "But there's something else, a sense of urgency in the way they acted. Like they knew about the entity before we even mentioned it." The human's brow furrowed. "You think they've dealt with something like that before?" "Maybe," Lyra said quietly. "Or worse." The conversation ended abruptly as the craft began its descent. Below them sprawled an enormous cityscape unlike anything either of them had ever seen. Towering buildings made of glass-like material reflected the light of multiple suns, creating a kaleidoscope effect that dazzled the eye. Streets teemed with activity, filled with beings of all shapes and sizes moving about with purpose. Hovering vehicles zipped through the air, weaving between massive constructs that floated effortlessly above the ground. The craft touched down on a platform suspended high above the city, surrounded by armed personnel. As the hatch opened, Lyra and the human were escorted out, their restraints still firmly in place. They were led into a structure that appeared to serve as some kind of command center. Inside, the atmosphere was tense yet efficient, with holographic displays projecting streams of data across the walls. Beings of various species worked side by side, their expressions focused as they communicated in rapid-fire bursts of language. At the far end of the room stood another figure, taller and more imposing than the ones who had captured them. This individual wore no helmet, revealing a face marked by intricate patterns that glowed faintly beneath the artificial lighting. Its eyes, large and multifaceted, locked onto Lyra and the human as they were brought forward. "So," the figure said, its voice resonating with authority, "you are the ones responsible for the anomaly detected earlier. Explain yourselves." Lyra swallowed hard, stepping forward despite her restraints. "We didn't mean to cause any trouble. We were fighting to survive." The figure studied her intently, its gaze piercing. "Survival often leads to unintended consequences. Tell me, what do you know of the Abyssal Directive?" Lyra blinked, caught off guard by the term. "The what?" Beside her, the human leaned in, whispering, "Do we admit we have no idea what they're talking about?" "Probably not," Lyra murmured back. Raising her voice, she addressed the figure directly. "We don't know what that is. All we did was fight back against something that was destroying everything we had left." The figure remained silent for a long moment, its expression unreadable. Finally, it turned to one of its subordinates. "Take them to containment. We'll decide their fate after further analysis. As they were led away, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled into something far bigger than themselves. Whatever the abyssal directive was, it wasn't something these people took lightly, and now, she and the human were at the center of it. The human leaned close again, his voice barely audible. Well, this just got a whole lot more complicated. Lyra nodded grimly. Tell me about it. The containment area was stark and sterile, a far cry from the bustling command center they just left behind. Lyra and the human were placed in separate cells, each one enclosed by shimmering energy barriers that pulsed faintly with a blue light. Despite the advanced technology surrounding them, the oppressive silence weighed heavily on their minds. Lyra paced back and forth within her cell, her thoughts racing. The term, abyssal directive, lingered in her mind like an unanswered riddle. She had never heard of it before, but judging by the reactions of their captors, it carried significant weight, perhaps even enough to overshadow their survival against the monstrous entity. Meanwhile, the human sat cross-legged on the floor of his own cell, leaning against the transparent barrier separating him from Lyra. So, he said aloud, breaking the silence. Any theories about this abyssal directive thing? Lyra stopped pacing and turned to face him, her glowing blue eyes narrowing thoughtfully. It sounds ominous. Like some kind of ancient law or prophecy meant to prevent chaos, or maybe control it. Control what, though? The human asked, tilting his head. Us? That monster we blew up. Something bigger? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know. But whoever these people are, they're clearly not amateurs. They've got resources, weapons, and knowledge beyond anything I've seen. If they're worried about us, then we should be worried too. Before the human could respond, the energy barrier of Lyra's cell flickered and dissolved, revealing one of their armored captors. Without a word, the figure gestured for her to follow. What about him? Lyra asked, glancing at the human still sitting in his cell. He will remain here, the figure replied curtly. For now. Reluctantly, Lyra stepped out of her cell, casting one last look at the human before being led down a long corridor lined with more holographic displays. The walls hummed softly, as if alive with dormant power. After several minutes of walking, they arrived at a large chamber dominated by a circular table surrounded by hovering chairs. At the center of the room stood the imposing figure who had questioned them earlier, the leader. Its multifaceted eyes gleamed as it regarded Lyra with an unnerving intensity. You have questions, it stated simply, its voice resonating throughout the chamber. Yes, Lyra replied, standing tall despite her unease. What is the abyssal directive? And why does it involve us? The figure paused, as if weighing its words carefully. Finally it spoke. The abyssal directive is an agreement forged millennia ago among countless civilizations across the galaxy. It exists to maintain balance, to prevent the rise of entities like the one you encountered. Lyra's breath caught. That thing. You knew about it? We suspected. The figure admitted. Such beings are remnants of a time before recorded history, fragments of primordial forces that predate existence itself. When awakened, they bring devastation unmatched by any other threat. And you think we caused its awakening? Lyra said, her tone defensive. Inadvertently, yes, the figure replied. Your colony's presence disrupted the natural equilibrium of this planet. The creatures you fought were drawn to your energy signatures, and their aggression stirred the entity from its slumber. Lyra clenched her fists, guilt washing over her. We didn't mean to cause harm. We were refugees, trying to survive. I understand, the figure said, its tone softening slightly. But intentions do not erase consequences. Your actions have destabilized this region of space, and now others may suffer because of it. Lyra swallowed hard, struggling to process the enormity of what she was hearing. What happens to us now? That depends, the figure said, stepping closer. You possess unique skills and resilience, qualities that could prove useful in addressing the imbalance you've created. However, trust must be earned. Before Lyra could respond, the doors slid open once more, and the human was escorted inside. His expression hardened as he entered, clearly wary of the situation. This is him? The figure asked, gesturing toward the human. Yes, Lyra confirmed. He helped me destroy the entity. Without him, I wouldn't have made it. The figure studied the human intently, its gaze lingering on his scarred face and weary demeanor. Then, without warning, it extended a hand toward him. A small device materialized in its palm, a sleek, metallic sphere etched with intricate patterns. Take this, the figure commanded. The human hesitated, glancing at Lyra for guidance. She nodded subtly, encouraging him to comply. Slowly, he reached out and took the sphere, turning it over in his hands. What am I supposed to do with it? He asked cautiously. Activate it, the figure instructed. If you are worthy, it will reveal itself. The human frowned, pressing his fingers against the surface of the sphere. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the object began to glow, emitting a warm golden light that filled the room. Symbols appeared along its surface, shifting and rearranging themselves into patterns neither Lyra nor the human could decipher. The figure nodded approvingly. Interesting. It seems you carry potential greater than anticipated. What does that mean? The human demanded, his grip tightening on the sphere. It means you both have a role to play, the figure explained. The Abyssal Directive requires guardians, individuals capable of maintaining balance and preventing further catastrophes. You two may yet serve that purpose. Lyra exchanged a glance with the human, sensing the weight of the decision before them. And if we refuse? Refusal is your right, the figure acknowledged. But know this, the consequences of inaction will ripple outward, affecting countless lives, including your own. Silence fell over the chamber as the gravity of the situation settled upon them. Finally, Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. We'll do it. Whatever it takes. The human nodded reluctantly, adding, Yeah. Guess we're stuck together again. The figure inclined its head, satisfied. Very well. Prepare yourselves. Your journey begins anew. As the lights dimmed and the chamber transformed into a staging area, Lyra felt a strange mix of dread and determination. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain, she wasn't facing it alone. Side by side, she and the humans stood ready to embrace whatever challenges awaited them, as unlikely allies bound by fate and necessity.